They say that sometimes karma doesn't just knock on your door, it drives straight through with a tractor. And in this case, that's exactly how it all began in a quiet countryside neighborhood where the homeowners association was ruled by a woman named Victoria, a self-proclaimed queen of order who thrived on rules, fines, and intimidation, believing she could bully everyone into compliance. But she had never gone up against a man like Daniel, a farmer by trade and a stubborn soul who valued freedom and his land more than anything else. And this clash would soon spiral into the kind of chaos no one in town would ever forget. Victoria had been eyeing Daniel's farm for months, whispering to developers and pushing her agenda in secret HOA meetings, because she wanted to turn his acres into some luxury housing project, and she thought forcing him out would be easy, just a matter of breaking him with endless fines and fabricated violations. But Daniel wasn't a man who bowed to pressure. He was the type who could wrestle the earth all day, who lived by sweat and grit, and who had absolutely no patience for entitled neighbors thinking they owned his property. The trouble truly began when Victoria's daughter, Melissa, announced her grand wedding and insisted on holding it on a rented estate right next to Daniel's farm, bragging to the entire neighborhood that it would be the event of the year, an elegant celebration where no expense would be spared, and where farm smells and country nonsense would have no place. Victoria and Melissa both took every chance to mock Daniel, saying his land ruined the view, his tractor was an eyesore, and his animals were a nuisance. But what they didn't know was that Daniel had already had enough of their insults and their schemes. And when Melissa's fiancé, Carter, strutted around acting like the king of the world, telling Daniel to clean up his dump before the wedding, Daniel decided he wasn't going to sit quietly anymore. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Victoria increased the HOA's pressure on him, sending him letters about supposed violations, from the color of his barn to the height of his grass, even threatening legal action. But Daniel simply stacked the letters on his kitchen counter, chuckling to himself and planning in silence, because he had a very different kind of reply in mind. The neighborhood gossips could sense tension building like a thunderstorm on the horizon, whispering about how Daniel looked calm, but his eyes burned with a fire, and how Victoria strutted around bragging that the farmer would learn his place soon enough. But Daniel was no pushover, and when the wedding weekend finally arrived, with tents set up, white chairs lined in perfect rows, and fancy cars filling the nearby road, Daniel rolled out his tractor, piled high with fresh, steaming manure, the kind only a farmer could gather in such staggering quantity, and positioned himself just over the fence. Guests were dressed in expensive suits and gowns, sipping champagne, fanning themselves under the summer sun, and sneering at the farm like it was some embarrassing backdrop. But Daniel didn't hesitate. He fired up that tractor, lifted the pile, and dumped load after load of manure right along the fence line, the stench rolling like a wave over the entire wedding venue. Chaos erupted instantly as guests gagged and covered their noses, some stumbling out of their chairs, others shouting in horror as the bride Melissa screamed that her perfect day was being ruined. Victoria stormed to the fence in her designer heels, screaming at Daniel, threatening lawsuits, shrieking about how he would pay, but Daniel just leaned back in his seat, tipped his hat, and said, "This is farm life, sweetheart. And you wanted a country wedding." The smell grew unbearable, clinging to every fabric, every decoration, even the towering cake that had been flown in at ridiculous expense. And within minutes, what was supposed to be a fairy tale ceremony dissolved into pandemonium. Guests rushing to their cars, photographers packing up, and Melissa sobbing uncontrollably as Carter tried to salvage dignity but ended up arguing with her in front of everyone. Yet Daniel wasn't finished, not by a long shot, because the manure was just phase one of his revenge. While the chaos swirled next door, Daniel's plan for the grand finale was waiting just over the horizon, something that would leave the town talking for years and ensure Victoria and her daughter never forgot the day they tried to cross him. If the first act of Daniel's revenge had left the neighborhood choking in disbelief, the second act would turn the entire county into witnesses of a spectacle so outrageous that people would be telling the story for years to come. Because Daniel wasn't the type to let a fight end halfway, and after the manure tractor stunt at Melissa's wedding, he knew he had to deliver something even bigger. something so unforgettable that Victoria and her daughter would never dare cross him again. As the ruined wedding dragged into disaster, with guests gagging and storming off, the bride shrieking about her destroyed dream day, and Victoria swearing she would sue Daniel into bankruptcy, no one noticed that the farmer had quietly left the scene, climbing into his old pickup and heading down the dirt road with a calm smile like a man about to play his final card. What no one knew was that Daniel had called in a favor from his cousin, who just happened to own a crop-dusting helicopter, the kind used to spray fields but equally capable of carrying heavy loads. While the wedding party was trying to salvage what was left of their humiliation, Daniel and his cousin were loading massive bins of manure into the helicopter's rig, laughing together as the rotors spun and the blades chopped the summer air. By the time the guests thought the worst was over and tried to restart the ceremony indoors, the roar of a helicopter began echoing over the horizon, growing louder by the second until everyone tilted their heads upward in horror. And there it was, Daniel's cousin piloting the chopper while Daniel leaned out with a rope, grinning like a madman, waving down at the sea of horrified faces below. Then, with one signal, the bins tipped, and thousands of pounds of manure rained down over the fancy white tents, the buffet tables, the dance floor, and most importantly, over Victoria and Melissa themselves. Screams erupted as expensive dresses were splattered, tuxedos ruined, and the once lavish decorations dissolved under the brown deluge. The bride's pristine gown turned into a stained disaster, her makeup streaked with tears as Carter tried to shield her, but ended up slipping in the filth, drawing laughter and gasps from the onlookers who couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Victoria, once so composed and haughty, was reduced to a shrieking, flailing mess, shaking her fists at the sky while covered from head to toe in the very thing she had mocked Daniel for. The helicopter circled once more for good measure, dropping another wave across the parking lot, coating luxury cars and turning the whole area into a scene straight out of a nightmare comedy. The smell was overwhelming, the humiliation unbearable, and within minutes the wedding had completely collapsed, guests fleeing in disgust, photographers snapping shots that would later leak online and go viral, immortalizing the downfall of the so-called Queen of the HOA. Daniel, satisfied with his masterpiece, shouted over the roar of the blades, "Consider this my RSVP," before the helicopter banked away and disappeared over the fields, leaving chaos in its wake. In the days that followed, the story spread like wildfire across the county. Neighbors, local news, even distant relatives couldn't stop talking about the infamous manure wedding. And while Victoria tried desperately to spin the story and file lawsuits, every lawyer she called laughed her off, reminding her that she had no legal claim over Daniel's farm and that she had provoked him with months of harassment. Melissa's marriage crumbled almost instantly under the humiliation, Carter walking away before their honeymoon even began, saying he couldn't live with someone who brought so much drama into his life. And the HOA's once feared grip over the neighborhood weakened as residents turned on Victoria, mocking her behind closed doors and refusing to follow her petty rules anymore. Daniel, on the other hand, became something of a local legend, the farmer who had taken down the HOA queen with nothing but grit, determination, and a mountain of manure. He went back to his daily life, tending his fields and livestock, tipping his hat at passers-by who now greeted him with respect instead of whispers. And though Victoria never forgave him, she learned the hard way that some battles are unwinnable, because when you pick a fight with a man who works the land, you better be ready for him to fight back with the earth itself. The manure wedding became more than just gossip. It became a cautionary tale, a reminder that arrogance, greed, and entitlement can be washed away in an instant, especially when karma comes raining down from the sky in the most unforgettable fashion imaginable.